Hello everyone, and welcome to this week's Motor Trade Radio podcast. Powered by Motors, the driving force behind multi-site advertising. With Philip Nothard and Curtis Hutchinson, bringing you all the chatter that matters.
Well, we're back again, Phil. Lots of headlines to talk about this week, and including what is probably going to be one of the biggest acquisitions of the year, I suspect.
Yeah, that's been bubbling in the background there, hasn't it? I know we've sort of acknowledged it before, but yeah, more about that later. But yeah, the big acquisition now done just in the early stages of the second quarter of the year. So it makes you think, though, what else now is in the market that could happen?
You
just never know.
One thing's for certain, there will be more.
Yes.
and there are some acquisitive businesses around there with war chests. So more of that later.
Yeah. So one thing to watch out for is we've got a supplier special coming up with a friend of the podcast, Maarten Bekkers, who is the owner and CEO of AutoChat. And that'll be on your podcast, hopefully in the next week. So keep your eye out for that. We'll do some pushes in social media on that when it becomes live. But that's a fascinating interview with Maarten as he talks through, what made him think about setting up the business, what his background was, and really what the business is all about, and their sort of footprint in Europe, coming to the UK, etc. But we have actually got a chat with Maarten at our midway break, but more about what he's been seeing with the data and activity within AutoChat and the world of AI and how he sees the world of AI. So stay tuned for partway through today's podcast as we talk with Maarten more about the side of AI on the podcast.
Also on your podcast feed is our recent interview with James Brearley, COO of Peter Vardy Group. And it was a fascinating chat we had with James about what the group is up to at the moment, plans, and also his background, because he really is an industry stalwart from his Pendragon and Inchcape days. So that's in your podcast feed or wherever you find and listen to your podcasts.
Yeah, definitely. We've not really covered the stories around the big motoring world and what's been happening there. And, we obviously, there was the last story in Car Dealer magazine just about a week ago where the Pete Waddell talked to Car Dealer about what's been happening in there. But this is an evolving situation between Pete Waddell and big motoring world. So if you are a friend of Pete Waddell's or you're connected with him in social media, then Peter's, as always, been very active within his LinkedIn posts, hasn't he, Curtis?
He has indeed, yes, yeah. And you're right, Phil. I mean, we took the decision that it is very much an evolving story, and the story broke as we were recording last week's episode, and it has evolved since then. So, as Philip says, if you really want to keep up to date with what's happening there, just follow Peter Waddell on LinkedIn, because he was pretty active over the course of this week, and sort of gives an indication as to what the next moves might be. So do check it out there.
Yeah, and just finally, a little bit of an acknowledgement to a friend of the podcast, a personal friend of mine as well, and an industry legend in many ways, is Sandy Burgess, who is CEO of the Scottish Motor Trade Association, which is SMTA, who is announced that he'd be stepping down after a decade in that role, that he's stepped down as chief executive of the Scottish Motor Trade Association. He'll officially leave his position at the end of this year, but there is an interview with him on Car Dealer, where he goes through, a bit of his 65-year-old began working in the motor trade in 1974 when he was an apprenticeship mechanic with a Datsun garage, which was then operated by the SMTA. So yeah, fantastic background story there with Sandy, and I personally wish him all the best in whatever he does next, and hopefully I'll get a chat with him sometime soon.
Yeah, Sandy's an absolute legend in the industry. He's done a superb job at representing dealers in Scotland. So I join you there, Philip, in wishing him well.
You're listening to the Motor Trade Radio podcast, powered by Motors.
So headlines this week are from Auto Retail Agenda, Car Dealer, Motor Trade News and AM Online. Starting with the big story of the week, Inchcape to exit UK dealer sector following sale of retailing business to an American group. Are used electric cars finally reaching price parity with ICE vehicles? INDICATA says they are. Independent dealers are being encouraged to stock EVs by CAP HPI. Dealers signal growing anti-agency sentiment amid manufacturer U-turns and delays. We got our first U-turn in already, Phil. And Greenhous Group launches prestige multi-marque used car business.
You're listening to all the chatter that matters on the Motor Trade Radio podcast. If you're a supplier and would like us to profile your business and reach our audience of dealer bosses, managers and decision makers on one of our dedicated supplier specials episodes, get in touch with Curtis and Philip at motortraderadio@yahoo.com.
So first story of the week is from Auto Retail Agenda, and the headline there is Inchcape sells UK retail division to Group1. So this follows a fair bit of speculation over recent weeks that Inchcape was going to be bought by AutoNation, another US group, but that wasn't to be the case. So Group1 has acquired the business for £346 million. And the deal will actually see Group1 more than double its size in the UK with this acquisition of, and it is just Inchcape's UK retail division. Inchcape as a business will continue as a global distributor of new cars. What did you make of this one, Phil?
So, I mean, as you say, I mean, the rumours were in the media initially by AutoNation, and I think we talked about it last week, where we sort of the Pendragon deal, wasn't it, when everybody was sort of were putting the names in the hat and looking at the Pendragon deal. But I suppose essentially that it was demonstrating there was still appetite for the UK market. There was appetite for the UK businesses from the US there, and particularly there was obviously funding in place to make move into these businesses. So, I mean, as you say there, Curtis, I mean, that taking Group1, up to 128 new car sales points from Group1's current position of just 55 sales points. I mean, that's a big acquisition and makes them a big player purely in the UK, obviously as part of their bigger global US business, but obviously from a UK perspective, really signifies their growth in the UK.
Yeah, I mean, it was already a sizable group operating across the southeast and East Anglia, but as you say, this more than doubles its representation to 128 car sales points. And Group1 currently represents 15 brands in the UK and employs 3,300 people, which is roughly in terms of size in terms of staff, that's pretty much the same as Inchcape, because Inchcape employs 3,600. And I mean, we were talking before we recorded about Inchcape, because Inchcape as a name has been around forever. So it's going to be sad to see it disappear from the franchise dealer world, but clearly the businesses will become part of Group1, but the name, I suspect, will disappear as Inchcape really does focus on that international distribution business. And it's worth recalling that Inchcape actually dates back as a business to colonial days. So it was British. It was listed, if you can believe this, Philip, it was first listed on the London Stock Exchange in Victorian times and was actually named after the Earl of Inchcape. So I guess we first became aware of, well, I certainly first became aware of Inchcape as a distributor for the likes of Toyota back in the 90s.
Yeah, I mean, that's it, isn't it? That they are a big global business, and as you say, they're a very big footprint in the OEM distribution side of the sector rather than the motor retail sector. And it was always, I mean, if you remember back, I mean, we've been talking about the rumours, haven't we, for a while with Inchcape, because there was a point where they were selling off a few sites, and then I think actually it was in the time when Mr. Brearley, James Brearley, was part
Yes.
of the business as well. And there was rumours, will they exit the UK? And I know James, in his tenure there, had sort of, tried, talking about the motor retail division a little bit more, because the motor retail division was never really talked about in any financial updates years ago. It was just part of the bigger business, and you couldn't really get insight into how the UK retail division was actually performing as part of the bigger business. But as you say, I mean, big moves there, big move for Group1. But I suppose a question out of the back of this is, what does AutoNation do next if they were interested in buying Inchcape? Who else is out there that they could be interested in if they have got the appetite for growth in the UK? But I think, for this, it'll play through. This is obviously the first stage of the acquisition now, and then there'll be a whole due diligence and everything that'll go through afterwards. But it'll be interesting to watch this one go through.
Yeah, and of course, this is only the latest in a succession of deals that we've seen over recent months. And it's another shift in the tectonics of the UK franchise dealer sector, because in the past year, we've had Pendragon being acquired by Lithia Group, also of the US. Which had previously, of course, acquired Jardine Motors. And we had Lookers being bought by Global Auto Holdings, whose Alpha Auto Group is owned by a Canadian business. So a lot of interest there from North America in the UK franchise business sector.
Yeah, so again, we'll see how this one starts to play through, and eagerly watch the next move of this, and obviously then what is going to be the next acquisition, Curtis. That's what's the bets on that one.
So next headline is from AM Online, and it is electric cars reaching price parity. INDICATA white paper shows. It's an interesting one, this, because it's certainly something we talk about on a monthly basis with Darren Martin from CAP HPI, because one of the key trackers at the moment in the used car sector is the pricing of electric vehicles, which we've seen coming down quite significantly over the last 12 months or so. So this is research done by INDICATA, and what they've done is they've taken a basket of 5 well-known EV vehicles, popular EV vehicles, and they've compared them with their nearest petrol diesel counterparts. And they've made it easy for themselves, because they're all models that can be bought as EVs or petrol and diesel. So it's the likes of the MG ZS, the Vauxhall Corsa, the Peugeot 208, Citroën C4, and Hyundai Kona.
Yeah, and as you say there, they've done that price comparison. So if you look at the Peugeot 208 BEV and the petrol model reached parity, and they're saying in June of 2023, at which point BEVs became worth more than the equivalent petrol model, and that it is now stayed until both fuels types reached price parity in March of this year at just 14,250, and that's based on a 2-year-old vehicle at 20,000 miles. So, again, 2-year-old vehicle, 20,000 miles, 14,250 if you wanted a petrol or diesel. It's a good price proposition, isn't it, as a used car?
It is, yeah, and I guess this is really on the back of, we're seeing more volume coming in there. We're seeing more defleeted EVs coming into the used car market, and that is helping to bring those prices down and just making them potentially more affordable for more buyers.
Yeah, and we mustn't forget, and one thing that I've been talking about recently is, this is as much about petrol and diesel holding firm in terms of we saw where the prices went, and accelerated through the bounce back of the pandemic, and some of those prices are not to pre-pandemic level yet, for ICE vehicles. So you still got petrol and diesel product that's holding reasonably firm in the market compared to their probably what they'd be worth with normal annual depreciation through the pandemic. So there's a little bit of price parity coming from, good, strong used car values for ICE vehicles, as well as you point out, Curtis, that realignment of battery electric vehicles, which I'm sure we'll touch that subject next week with Darren a little bit more, is to see what's been happening in that BEV market for this month.
Yeah, definitely. And that story is very closely linked with our next one, which is from Motor Trade News. And the headline there is "Independent Dealers Encouraged to Stock EVs." So this, it's turning into the Darren Martin show, this, isn't it? Because this is based on some comments made by Darren Martin, Director of Valuations at CAP HPI, during the week. And it's based on new data that CAP HPI have released, that shows that only 17% of independent dealers stocked and advertised electric vehicles over the course of last month. And that figure rises to 43% for franchise dealers and 49% for car supermarkets. So you can see that disparity there between the franchise and car supermarket sectors and independent sectors. But it's understandable, really, isn't it? Because there was certainly over the last 12, 18 months or even longer, there's been a lot of risk associated with stocking certain EV models because of that depreciation.
Yeah, no, and we know that before the price alignment, a lot of the groups, the franchise and the supermarkets were trying to get into BEVs. They were adopting the electric vehicle as part of their profile. But then we got the price realignment, which caught the cold for many, didn't it? I mean, it caught many of them out in terms of those price reductions there. But again, now, there's still, as we were just covering in the last story there, some price parity, good value of those used vehicles. But again, I think there is still generally a nervousness, particularly within the independent dealer sector, to invest too much in battery electric vehicles. One, because they're probably maybe a bit nervous about the prices still realigning, but two, whether the demand is there for them as a used proposition. But you listen to stuff coming out from, Motors were talking about how quickly some of the EVs are selling in days to sell, weren't they? Yeah. So, I think there's still, like you say, disparity, particularly between those franchise and supermarkets and the independents. But it is interesting that your car supermarkets at 49%, it's kind of, they operate in that space and they've got to get, volume of used cars. So, with the way the market's shifting, BEVs has got to be a significant portfolio of their used car proposition now.
Yeah, definitely. And we will be, as you say, catching up with Darren Martin to look at how April panned out. And, hopefully we'll be able to bring that conversation to you next week or early the week after. But moving on, after the break, we've got our interview with Maarten Bekkers, founder of AutoChat.
You're listening to all the chatter that matters on Motor Trade Radio. Powered by Motors, the driving force behind multi-site advertising. This is your weekly one-stop shop for all the biggest car retailing headlines from across the media, available on demand, wherever you are on your podcast feed.
Next up, we're delighted to welcome Maarten Bekkers, founder of AutoChat, a company very much at the forefront of introducing AI tech in the dealer sector. And Maarten's here to talk about some of the inroads being made in Europe and also in the UK. So welcome to the podcast, Maarten.
Thank you very much.
Hi, Maarten. Great to speak to you again. I know we've bumped into each other at events over here in the UK. I think you spend as much time over here in the UK as you do in Belgium recently. But there's a lot going on. But, welcome, as I say. I mean, what we could do, Maarten, is just give us a brief outline of the AI tech that you've already implemented across dealerships in various European markets and in the UK.
Yeah. So what we actually offer is a conversational AI. So it's also called generative AI. It generates conversations based on training input from a dealer, and we have a website plugin that car dealers can use on their website to assist customers with a system that can assist the customers with answering questions, but also booking appointments with the service department and also the sales department. And that's what we offer now in Belgium, Holland, and the Netherlands. Okay, I must say.
Yeah. And who are you currently working with in those markets? Because I know you're in lots of conversations, but who are you actually live with in those markets in terms of dealer groups?
Yeah, so the main customers are now from Belgium and the Netherlands, and then we talk about the big dealer groups like Van Mossel, Netguns, also Volkswagen Audi groups like Vallei, Wittebrug, A-Point in Amsterdam. So Urs en Barten, which is also a very big dealer in the north of the Netherlands. So it's very diverse, but it are all dealer groups. And in the UK, we also have our first customers live. And one of them is Devonshire Motors, a Hyundai dealer, and we are starting up in Ireland as well with for a Volkswagen, Audi, and BMW dealer group, Frank Key. So we're also very much looking forward to bring them live. So we've been so far mainly focused on our home markets, which are Belgium and Holland, and now rolling out in the UK as well.
And staying with the UK, I mean, it's great that you're working with Devonshire Motors because they're very much a friend of the podcast. And Nathan at Devonshire Motors, I know he's a great exponent for tech and implementing tech. Can you give us a flavour of how AI will be used in the UK? And also, is there any suspicion or reluctance to embrace AI?
Absolutely, that's a very good question. So what we see is there's very often a misinterpretation of AI. So what we see is that quite often people say, it's a chatbot. We don't like chatbots. But chatbot is not a correct word anymore. An old-fashioned chatbot, I also don't like them. That doesn't work well, but this is a language model. It's a language model where you in a natural language can have a conversation. You can go from left to right and back to left, and it's not comparable at all. And what we sometimes see as a misinterpretation is that people say, but that's AI, so it's not personal. And I also must say that that's not the case at all. It's hyper personal. If personal is something that you want, then you should embrace this technology because you make it hyper personal. But I understand the thought, it's AI. AI is artificial. Artificial is not a human being. Not a human being means it's impersonal. But that's totally incorrect. And I see that you see a lot of studies also in the healthcare where conversational AI is used, where actually the majority of the people who use it, and then I talk about more than 80%, they prefer the AI over a human because the AI has patience, shows empathy, keeps on talking to you. It's really very personal. So that's something that is, I think, important to emphasize.
Yeah, I think I couldn't agree more. I think it is that differential between the two, isn't it, that needs to clearly come through. And I mean, and finally, Maarten, I mean, we know that when you first rolled AutoChat out, a lot of the beta testing was based on feedback and data in terms of what you were doing. Have you any data showing some of the trends that you've identified since working, particularly in the UK or even in Europe?
Absolutely. So what we see is that if you replace forms with a conversation, that the conversion of website visits towards an appointment, towards a lead, is much higher when you use a conversational AI tool. So that's one thing that we see. But on the other end, we also see that the profitability of a dealer is very thin. It's very low actually. And what you see with the agency model, it's becoming more and more difficult to remain profitable. Also with electrification of cars, it's also becoming more and more difficult to actually earn money on service. And I think that in the UK, also electrification will happen, and a lot more electric cars will hit the market. And so what you see is that dealer groups are searching for ways to save costs and to do more volume with less people, but they don't want to do that with offering a worse customer experience. So there we see that if we look at the data, we can offer a better user experience at a much lower cost. And also this technology is moving so fast. More and more things are possible to automate every month. And so we really see that this is the way to save cost, to lower your cost, and keep your margins.
Well, Maarten, thanks for joining us. I mean, it's fascinating to hear how AI is being used to help dealers automate elements of their customer contact and, in fact, achieve better results with less sort of manual input. So for anyone interested in hearing more about Maarten's work and how AutoChat could benefit your business, then look out for our special supplier episode, our supplier special, which will focus on AutoChat and will be available in your podcast feed from next week. So many thanks for joining us, Maarten.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Maarten, and I will speak to you soon.
Speak to you soon. Thank you. Bye.
Well, what a nice, good interview there with the chat with Maarten Bekkers and sharing some of the the efficiencies around the use of AI in automotive, and particularly in that consumer engagement space, and how it can make businesses more efficient, more detailed, and productive in that space. But yeah, and obviously what he does talk about, which I found very interesting, is unfortunately, but the minute you talk about AI, there's some of it you automatically think of the Chat GBT, don't you?
Yes.
And obviously what the government are talking about, the dangers of AI and things like this. But clearly that's not the case with what Maarten was saying.
Yeah, definitely. It really is an eye-opener, and it's fascinating to hear how this has been rolled out across some pretty big groups in Europe, and Maarten's plans for the UK, because there clearly is an opportunity and appetite for this delivery of AI to really automate some of the sort of more basic items at the sort of back end and helping to improve customer service. So definitely a trend to watch there.
It is one that people do talk a lot about in the industry, don't they? That customers not getting answers, not getting response rates, things like this. And this allows it that you are engaging, you are responding to the customer, you're responding to the customer's queries in a friendly and efficient way, and accurate as well. I mean, the use of it in terms of being able to get the right information back to the customer in a very quick and productive, efficient way is key. And it does talk obviously about some of those efficiencies and where some of the early adopters of this have really seen an increase in that efficiency.
So moving on, and next headline is from AM Online, and it is dealers signal growing anti-agency sentiment amid manufacturer U-turns and delays. Discuss.
Well, I mean, my first question to you, Curtis, is I've not heard a dealer yet jumping for joy about going to agency. Have you?
No, definitely not. No. So, it does make you wonder about the growing anti-agency sentiment, because I think it was already there.
I think they weren't very positive about it anyway. I think there was an acceptance, maybe. I think there might have been a case of it was accepted and they understood it, and they understood maybe the rationale behind it. But yeah, it's. I mean, I suppose really. I mean, you're talking about that U-turn on it, and the manufacturers doing U-turns, or in many cases maybe more of a deferment. I think we mentioned this, didn't we, on some of these stories earlier on, that some of this is more about a deferment as they sort of navigate their way through all the challenges in the market and try and understand the process in a little bit more detail before they make the move. So I'm not sure that this has gone away. I think some of these ones that have been reported of doing a U-turn will be back at some point when they've worked it out.
Yeah, and it was a point that was made very clearly by Steve Young from the ICDP when we had him on the show last month, because he was saying that a lot of the agency plans that OEMs are looking at are 5-year plans. So, they may look at something, they may do the U-turn, they may hit the pause button after 18 months, but you can pretty much guarantee that if they're looking at agency, they will return to it, and that they'll return when it's right for them. So you're right, it's not going to go away. This is how the sector is moving. Certainly, with the brands who have committed to agency, even if they have pause for the time being. But I guess going back to this particular story, because this is all based on some research done by Startline, and it's part of their used car tracker, which we seem to cover on a monthly basis, because they do get some really good data from dealers. So it's a good barometer of what dealers are thinking at the moment. And it found that almost 3/4 of dealers surveyed believe that there is a trend developing against manufacturer agency models, with 23% of them saying it is proving wrong for dealers, and 21% saying that it's proving wrong for manufacturers themselves.
Yeah, and there's a nice quote here from Paul Burgess, the CEO at Startline Motor Finance, saying the adoption of the agency model has always been controversial to a degree, and the recent decision of some of the manufacturers to reverse or delay their plans has caused a lot of noise, and saying that their findings show that dealers believe that the tide may be turning, at least for an extent. And certainly it appears that a fairly commonly held view that agency isn't working for the dealers and the manufacturers, and that some will change their mind about its adoption. So again, probably reflecting what we were just saying earlier, that there is a bit of a sort of a review, a delay, a pause, as you said, Curtis, there, that there's a lot to work out. And I've always been of the view that it's got to work for all three involved. Primarily it's got to work for the consumer, the buyer, but it's also got to work for the OEM and the dealer in terms of profitability, because the OEMs are working out very quickly the role played by the dealers, and the importance of having that dealer network and the operational side that they get involved with. And I think clearly they can't do that without the OEMs can't move to agency without the dealers, and they need to work out that relationship that then doesn't harm the customer engagement at the end of it. So they've got to work it out that it's works for all three. And as Steve has alluded to on a few of the interviews there from ICDP, I think it's more of a hybrid starting to emerge rather than a blueprint of pure agency now. That there is the appetite from the OEM still to have that control of the consumer, still the control over pricing, but they've got to work very closely with the dealer network on it.
Yeah, and this is certainly a topic that we will be returning to. So, but definitely worth checking out the AM story, because there's some interesting stats and comments in there. But last story of the week comes from Motor Trader, and the headline there is Greenhous launches Lumen Automotive prestige used car business. So this is Greenhous Group, the multi-franchise Shropshire-based group, who we don't talk about them a lot on the podcast. So you rarely see their name in the headlines, because I think what they do is that they've got a very, very good business and they just get on with it quietly, don't they? But this is particularly interesting because they've launched what is an online used car business focused on top-end prestige models, which they're branding as Lumen Automotive.
No, you're right, and I keep a close eye on Greenhous, because you and I have known them for a long time in the sector, and Danny Minchell, who I was with recently, he's very avid listener to the podcast, and I'm sure he'll be listening to us this morning. That a lot of work going on at Greenhous at the minute, and you mustn't forget that they have been on an acquisition trail as well. I think they've recently bought one of the Kazoo sites back from them. So there's a lot going on in the Greenhous business, but as you say there, it tends to be a little bit below the radar. But as you say there, this online business now that they've named Lumen, it's about that prestige and performance, and that they currently got 40 cars listed on site, and this includes Alfa Romeo, Audi, Bentley, BMW, Land Rover, Mercedes-Benz, Porsche and Tesla models. And this is an online, isn't it, that you do need to make an appointment to view the vehicle, but this has come under the appointment of a new leader, a new sort of Chris Sage there, who is heading up the business. And he's been recently appointed in January of this year, following a 3-year period as sales manager at Shrewsbury-based Lakeside Classics. So a new vision from them and what they're doing there.
Yeah, definitely. And it's going to be an interesting one to watch. And Chris goes on to say, our goal is to provide an unmatched experience for customers in both service and quality when it comes to prestige and performance cars. And it is an online only business. And as you point out, if customers want to view a model, it's by appointment only. So that they really are bringing that sort of upmarket franchise feel to a used car specialist used car business.
Yeah, and there is a quote there at the end from Ashley Percent, who's the Greenhous Group managing director of the car division, saying that the launch of Lumen Automotive is a significant milestone for Greenhous Group and demonstrating their commitment on growth by stepping into the luxury automotive sector and continuing their strong focus on customer experience. So great growth. And as you say there, we don't talk about them enough on the podcast, that there are a few things happening within Greenhous that's been below the radar. So like I say, Danny, I know you do listen to the podcast on a weekly basis, that the offer is there, either for yourself or Ashley, if he wants to come on to the podcast, then the offer is there to come on and have a chat to us, to be tell us about what's been happening within the world of Greenhous. But that's it for this week. So we, again, the interview with Maarten Bekkers, who's the owner and chief executive of the AutoChat, and will be on your podcast in the coming week. And that's a little bit more detail about who they are, what they do, how did he, why he set up the business in the first place, and a bit of Maarten's background and obviously their growth ambitions across Europe and the UK there. But hopefully the little chat with him gave you a little bit of insight into the world of AI and that sort of chat box experience starting to emerge within automotive.
But that's all for now. So many thanks for joining us on the Motor Trade Radio podcast. As Philip says, don't miss our supplier special, which will be available on your podcast feeds during the week. Until then, it's goodbye from me.
And it's goodbye from him.
Thank you for listening to the Motor Trade Radio podcast, powered by Motors, the driving force behind multi-site advertising. We'll be sharing all the URLs from this week's headlines on Monday morning. To make sure you receive them, just subscribe to the free newsletter on our LinkedIn page. Just search Motor Trade Radio Podcast.